I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. Friday evenings were sacred in our house, a tradition rooted in the early days of our marriage. Emma and I would share a quiet meal, sip wine, and talk about anything that crossed our minds. It wasn't fancy or extravagant, but it was ours, a ritual that brought stability to an otherwise chaotic world. That night was no different, at least on the surface. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air as Emma poured wine into my glass. She moved gracefully around the kitchen, her blonde hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, her eyes sparkling in the warm light. I watched her from the table, marveling at how lucky I was to have someone so vibrant and beautiful. But something felt off. Her smile was tight, her laugh half-hearted. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed her acting differently, but tonight it seemed more pronounced. She seemed distracted, as if the weight of some unspoken thought was pressing down on her. "Dan," she began, sliding into her seat across from me. Her voice was soft but deliberate, carrying a tone that immediately put me on edge. "There's something I need to talk to you about." I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. Oh. Is this about the golf clubs? They were on sale, I swear." She smiled faintly but didn't laugh. "No, it's not about the golf clubs." She hesitated, looking down at her wine glass before meeting my gaze. It's about us." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't about golf clubs. It wasn't about anything trivial. Her words carried the weight of something far more serious. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, as though preparing for a speech she had rehearsed countless times. "Dan, you know I love you. I've always loved you. But lately, I've been feeling unfulfilled. Like there's something missing in my life. Something I need to explore." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She pressed on, her words coming faster now as if she feared losing her nerve. "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be happy, about personal growth and self-discovery. And I think that, exploring a connection with someone else might be what I need to feel complete." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. "You're saying you want to cheat on me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's not cheating. It's about growth, about exploring who I am as a person. I think this could actually make our marriage stronger." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Emma, do you even hear yourself? How does this make anything stronger?" She reached across the table, her eyes pleading. "Dan, this isn't about replacing you or what we have. It's about adding to it, about finding a way to be the best version of myself. I need you to trust me on this." "Trust?" The word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. "How long have you been thinking about this?" I asked, my voice flat. "For a while," she admitted. "But I didn't want to bring it up until I was sure. I've done a lot of soul-searching, and I really believe this is the right thing to do." I looked at her, the woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted implicitly for a decade. She wasn't the person I thought she was. Or maybe she was, and I was only now seeing the truth. "I need some air," I said, pushing back from the table. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, leaving Emma sitting there with her glass of wine and her twisted ideas about love and growth. The cool night air hit me like a slap, clearing my head enough to think. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my mind racing. How had we gotten here? Was I really so blind to the cracks in our marriage? Or was this just who Emma had always been, a woman who could rationalize betrayal as self-improvement? By the time I returned home, the lights in the house were off. Emma was already in bed, her side of the story told, her conscience clear. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. I knew I couldn't leave it at that. Something wasn't right. There was more to this than she was letting on, and I needed to find out what. The next morning, while Emma was out running errands, I made my move. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, unlocked. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and opened her messages. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, in a thread with the name Marcus, was the confirmation of everything I had feared. Flirty messages, suggestive photos, and a text that made my blood run cold. Can't wait for our weekend together. Dan will never know. My grip on the phone tightened as I scrolled through the messages, each one more damning than the last. She had lied to my face, spinning her deceit as some noble quest for personal growth. And now, she was planning to spend a weekend with another man while expecting me to support her journey. When Emma returned home, I said nothing. I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal before I confronted her. So I played along, pretending everything was fine, while secretly gathering evidence. If she wanted to play games, I would beat her at her own. The week following Emma's revelation felt like stepping into a surreal play, where I was both the actor and the audience. I played my part, smiling through conversations, nodding at her stories, and pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. Meanwhile, every moment alone was spent piecing together the puzzle of her betrayal. Emma, for her part, seemed almost relieved after our conversation. She assumed I was on board, that my silence meant acceptance. The air between us was different, lighter for her, heavier for me. It was like she'd laid down a burden that I now carried alone. But I wasn't as naive as she thought. I'd seen enough crime shows and read enough spy novels to know how to dig deeper without tipping her off. I started with her phone. Late at night, while she slept soundly beside me, I unlocked it using the passcode I had guessed weeks ago, our anniversary. She was careful but not meticulous. A few deleted messages and cryptic emojis were all the proof I needed to confirm that Marcus wasn't just some fleeting crush. One night, I found her emails. They were far more revealing. There were hotel reservations under fake names, love letters disguised as work memos, and even photos of them together, casual enough to seem innocent to the untrained eye but damning to a husband on high alert. The timestamps aligned with her business trips, each lie meticulously woven into the fabric of our life. I could feel the bile rise in my throat every time I uncovered another piece of evidence. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw her phone across the room and demand answers. But I knew I had to be patient. Emma was clever, and I needed to be smarter. The next step was her social media. Emma was private, never one to overshare online, but Marcus wasn't as cautious. His accounts painted a picture of a man who enjoyed flaunting his life, lavish dinners, luxury cars, and cryptic captions that suddenly made sense. A photo of his dinner with a beautiful companion aligned perfectly with one of Emma's supposed late nights at work. The caption read, "Some secrets taste sweeter." My stomach turned. I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I'd do in my lifetime. His name was Greg, a no-nonsense former cop who had seen it all. When I explained my situation, he didn't offer empty reassurances or moral judgments. He simply nodded and said, "Give me 3 days." 3 agonizing days later, Greg delivered a manila envelope containing his findings. Photos, timestamps, and detailed logs of Emma and Marcus's movements. The final nail in the coffin was a picture of them entering a boutique hotel, hand in hand, the night she had told me she was working late. It felt like a scene from a movie, except this was my life. Friday arrived, and with it came the crescendo of my carefully orchestrated performance. Emma was unusually chipper as we sat down for dinner. She wore the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she knew I loved. She had taken extra care with her makeup, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. It was an odd juxtaposition, the picture of a loving wife hiding the heart of a deceiver. As we ate, she spoke about her day at work, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's been so busy lately, but I think things are finally slowing down," she said, swirling her wine. "Maybe we should plan a little getaway, just the two of us." The audacity of her suggestion almost made me laugh. "That sounds great," I replied, forcing a smile. "Where do you think we should go?" "Oh, somewhere warm. Maybe a beach," she mused, her eyes twinkling. "It'll be good for us." Good for us. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the anger bubbling inside me. Instead of responding, I slid the manila envelope across the table. Emma's brow furrowed as she set down her glass and opened it. Her face went pale as she pulled out the photos and documents, each one a silent accusation. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You've been so busy with self-discovery. I figured you'd appreciate me discovering the truth." Her hands shook as she shuffled through the contents. "Dan, I can explain." "Save it," I interrupted. "I don't need your explanations. I need the truth. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to mine. For a moment, I thought she might lie again, but then she sighed, defeated. "A few months," she admitted. "It started during one of the work trips." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "And all that talk about personal growth? That was just your way of justifying this? Of making yourself feel better about stabbing me in the back?" "It's not like that," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I felt so lost, so trapped. Marcus made me feel alive again." "Alive?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? You didn't feel alive, Emma. You felt selfish." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't care. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel compelled to comfort her. "Dan, please," she begged. "We can work through this. It doesn't have to end like this." I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ended this the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The moment you let him into our lives." Emma reached for me, but I stepped back. "Dan, please. I love you." "No, Emma," I said coldly. "You love yourself. And you'll have plenty of time to explore that on your own." I walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and the power was back in my hands. But this wasn't the end, not yet. The storm was just beginning. The following morning, the house was eerily silent. Emma's side of the bed was untouched, a stark contrast to the chaos inside my head. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like a stranger, broken, vulnerable, and suddenly small. "Dan, we need to talk," she said softly as I walked in. I poured myself a cup of coffee, ignoring the tremor in her voice. "There's nothing left to say, Emma. You've said it all. Please, just listen," she begged, standing as I sat down across from her. "I messed up. I know I did. But I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I met her gaze, my own steady and cold. "You think this can be fixed? After everything you've done? After you lied to my face and used me as a cover for your affair?" Her lip quivered, and she reached for my hand. I pulled it back before she could touch me. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "But I don't want to lose you." I let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't make a mistake, Emma. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. You made a choice, a calculated, selfish choice that destroyed everything we built." Her tears came faster now, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But instead, she knelt in front of me, clutching my hand despite my attempts to pull away. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't throw away 10 years. Don't throw away us." I yanked my hand free, standing so abruptly that my chair tipped over. "You threw it away the moment you let him touch you," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "Don't put this on me." I left her there, crumpled on the floor, her sobs following me down the hallway like a haunting melody. Over the next few days, Emma tried everything to win me back. She cooked my favorite meals, cleaned the house until it sparkled, and left me handwritten notes apologizing and professing her love. Each gesture only fueled my anger. It was as if she thought these superficial acts could erase the betrayal, as if she could bribe her way back into my heart. The worst was when she suggested we go to counseling. "It could help," she said, her voice hopeful. "We could work through this, together." I stared at her, incredulous. "You think talking to a stranger about how you cheated is going to make me forget it? That it'll undo the damage?" "It's not about forgetting," she said, her voice trembling. "It's about healing." I shook my head. "You don't get it, Emma. This isn't a wound that heals. It's a scar, a permanent reminder of what you did." Her face crumpled, and she turned away, her shoulders shaking. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the lies. Whatever sympathy I might have felt was quickly replaced by anger. The breaking point came when I discovered she had reached out to Marcus after our confrontation. I found the messages on her phone, hidden in a folder she must have thought I wouldn't check. They weren't overtly romantic, but the tone was unmistakable. She was trying to explain things to him, trying to salvage whatever twisted connection they had. I confronted her that evening, slamming her phone down on the table. "You're still talking to him?" Emma's eyes widened, and she shook her head furiously. "No, it's not what you think." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice a dangerous whisper. "Don't insult me by pretending this is innocent." She stepped back, her hands trembling. I wanted to explain to him that it was over." "Explain to him?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You should be worried about explaining things to me, Emma. Not him." "I am," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I am, Dan. Please, believe me." I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to cry and beg for forgiveness while you're still holding on to him." "It's not like that," she pleaded. "I swear." "Then what is it like, Emma? Enlighten me. Tell me how betraying me and then running back to him makes you the hero of this story." Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I don't know why I did it. I was lost." "Well, you're about to lose everything," I said coldly. "Because I'm done." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "Dan, no. Please. Don't do this." But my mind was made up. I couldn't live like this, constantly questioning her, doubting her, wondering if I'd ever be enough. I deserved better, and I wasn't going to let her take any more from me. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. We'd had a prenuptial agreement, one Emma had insisted on when we got married. At the time, I'd thought it was unnecessary, proof of how little faith she had in our future. Now, it was my saving grace. By the end of the day, the divorce papers were drawn up. I returned home, the envelope tucked under my arm like a shield. Emma was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes puffy and red. "What's that?" she asked, her voice trembling as I handed her the envelope. "Read it," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. Her hands shook as she opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. When she looked up, her face was pale. "You're divorcing me?" "I'm setting myself free," I corrected. From you. From this. From everything you've done. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. Dan, please. Don't do this. It's already done, I said, turning away. You made your choice, Emma. Now I'm making mine. As I walked out the door, her sobs echoed behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm was over, and I was finally free. It was a week after I served the papers when I received a call from Emma. She hadn't reached out since I walked out, and I'd assumed she was licking her wounds, perhaps turning to Marcus for comfort. My lawyer had assured me the process would be smooth, given our prenuptial agreement. I thought I was ready for this new chapter, a life without the woman I'd once thought was my forever. When her name lit up on my phone screen, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring out and continue my day as if she didn't exist. But curiosity got the better of me. Dan, her voice was soft, almost hollow. Can we talk? I don't think there's anything left to say, I replied, my tone cold. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Just, come to the house. One last time. I sighed, debating whether it was worth the trouble. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Fine. I'll be there in an hour. The house felt different when I arrived. The warm light that usually poured through the windows was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. Emma was sitting at the dining table, the same place where she'd first confessed her need to grow. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles that made her look like she hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice barely audible. I stayed standing, leaning against the doorway. What is it, Emma? She fidgeted with a piece of paper in front of her, not meeting my eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began. About everything, about us, about what I've done. And I realized something. I crossed my arms, waiting for whatever excuse she had this time. What's that? Tears welled in her eyes, and she finally looked up at me. I don't deserve you. I never did. Her words caught me off guard. Emma, it's a little late for that realization, don't you think? She nodded, a sad smile flickering across her face. I know. But I wanted you to hear it from me. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for how I made you feel. You didn't deserve any of it. I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't the defiant, manipulative woman I'd been dealing with for weeks. This was someone I barely recognized, fragile, remorseful, and heartbreakingly sincere. I appreciate that, I said cautiously. But it doesn't change anything. I know, she whispered. I just needed to say it. She stood, sliding the piece of paper across the table toward me. I wrote this for you. It's everything I've been feeling, everything I couldn't say out loud. Maybe one day, you'll read it. I didn't reach for it. Emma, if this is another way to... It's not, she interrupted, shaking her head. It's not about getting you back. I know I can't fix what I broke. I wanted you to have it. The raw vulnerability in her voice disarmed me. Against my better judgment, I picked up the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Okay, I said, my tone softer than I intended. I'll read it. She gave me a small nod, her tears now flowing freely. Thank you. I turned to leave, ready to put this chapter of my life behind me for good. As I reached the door, she called out one last time. Dan. I paused, glancing back. What? I'll always love you, she said, her voice trembling. Even if I don't deserve you, I'll always love you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I walked out, the weight of her words lingering as I climbed into my car. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the piece of paper she'd given me lying on the coffee table. I debated throwing it away, telling myself it was just another ploy to manipulate me. But something about the way she'd looked at me, the quiet resignation in her eyes, made me pick it up. Her handwriting was neat but shaky, the words flowing together like a stream of consciousness. She wrote about her regrets, her shame, and how she never meant to hurt me. She spoke of her love for me, how it had never truly faded despite her actions. And then, at the very bottom, a single sentence stopped me cold. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone, dialing her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. I tried again, the same result. Panic set in as I grabbed my keys and drove back to the house. The front door was unlocked, and the lights were still off. I called her name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. And then I saw her, a figure slumped over on the couch, a bottle of pills and an empty glass of wine on the table beside her. "Emma!" I shouted, rushing to her side. Her skin was cold, her lips pale. I shook her, screaming her name, but she didn't respond. My hands trembled as I called 911, my voice barely steady enough to relay the address. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like an eternity. They worked on her as I stood frozen, watching helplessly as the woman I'd once loved hovered between life and death. When they finally loaded her into the ambulance, one of them turned to me. "Are you coming with us?" I hesitated, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Then, without a word, I climbed into the back of the ambulance. Emma didn't make it. The overdose had been too much, her body too weak to recover. The guilt hit me like a freight train. I replayed every argument, every cold word, every time I'd ignored her attempts to reach out. I'd told myself I was justified, that I was the victim. But now, standing in the sterile hospital room beside her lifeless body, none of it mattered. I read her letter again that night, tears streaming down my face. Her final words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of what I'd lost: "I'll always love you, even if I don't deserve you." For the first time, I wondered if I had failed her, too. And as the weight of her absence settled over me, I realized that some scars never fade, they only deepen with time.